Hello everyone, welcome to GS Core. In today's special report session, we'll talk about reforms in urban planning capacity in India. You must be wondering that this does not look like a title of the report, but the truth is that it is one. My name is Abhishiekh Saxena and I am a faculty at GS Core. So, when we talk about urban planning and urban development in general, uh, a few things come to our mind: municipalities, institutions, then obviously the problems, bad roads, drainage, uh, housing, slums, solid waste disposal, so on and so forth. While India has adopted a planned approach to development for a large part of its history, and that planned approach to development in a way made a generational shift with the coming up of NITI Aayog, but the basics remain the same, that we as a nation and the responsible governments at various levels need to plan for development, right? And hence the planning assumes significance in general, more so for urban centers, because urban centers are referred to as the growth centers. They are the gravitators to which a large number of people gravitate, which we call as migration. There are different types of migration, seasonal migration, so on and so forth. And then there is a phenomena of urbanization, which basically nudges the government to plan for urban development, or which we call as urban planning, to make our cities more livable, sustainable and workable. So the urban planning is important, and I beg your pardon, reforms in urban planning and reforms with regards to the capacity to plan for urban areas is crucial. So let us get into the thick of this particular report. So this particular report basically is given by NITI Aayog. As you are aware, NITI Aayog replaced the Planning Commission, right? And it measures to ramp up the urban planning capacity in India. Okay, ramp up urban planning capacity. So a lot of you must be wondering, what is capacity here? The capacity here denotes every aspect to which an urban area can be better governed, and obviously through some institutions. So in urban areas, you have metropolitan committees, municipal councils, municipal corporations, so on and so forth. And the urban planning capacity, whether you have town planners, designers, right, so on and so forth. So it's not just the issue of a trained manpower. It is largely an issue of fund, functions, functionaries. When I say functionaries, yes, functions, whether the urban local bodies or the body at the helm in the urban areas are empowered with those functions. Okay, whether they have sufficient funds, and even if they are empowered and they have certain funds, do they have the manpower? So while a lot of discourse in the conventional literature gets limited to the issue of fund, functions and functionaries, there are other aspects. For example, citizen engagement. Are our cities becoming more inclusive, or are they getting more exclusive, that poor people are not allowed? Women are not, the city is very good, functional, there are growth, there is growth, there are jobs, but it is not safe for women. Okay, there is while the city is good, the fringes are littered. Whether we are making disabled friendly cities, whether we are making recreational spaces, right? So there are multiple aspects to this capacity. Okay, so while we talk about capacity, and it will be a theme running across this particular session, let us look at the salient features and the background. So as I told that it is prepared by NITI Aayog to ramp up urban planning capacity. Okay, then there are certain facts which in a way put focus on the need of this report and need of such analysis and their significance. India is the second largest urban system in the world. Okay, with almost 11% of the total global urban population. 11% of the total global urban population living in Indian cities. While, there is a famous quote that India lives in its villages, right? That is clear to a certain extent. However, we are the second most populous country in the world, and that makes us, the sheer giganticity of India makes us, or our cities, where 11% of the global city dwellers reside. And at the same time, you will find that a lot of India, while still being in villages, is in a transition. When I say transition, they are not exactly abjectly rural. Most, or a sizable chunk, is in the urban belt. That it is in a sort of transition zone between rural and urban. So it is somewhere here, not completely rural, neither completely urban. So this is a process, this is a fluid process which is ever growing. As we attain more growth and development, so this process will accelerate. Okay. This is still more than highly urbanized countries like, for example, 11% is almost, more than 10% is more than you'll find in US or Japan or Western Europe and so on and so forth. Okay. Then UN estimates, United Nations estimates that India will surpass China. India will surpass China as most populous country by 2027. By 2027. Okay. And this urban sprawl or urban growth will be responsible or will be a very important part in this growth. Okay. At the same time, economic transformation is in a way signaling towards that attention for urban planning and capacity building. Just like I said, that India is getting developed by the day. We are slowly but steadily matching the pace with the more urbanized countries of the world. Not in every aspect, yes, we have our gray areas, but still the development pace of above 6% consistently, says a lot. Okay. And there is an inflection point which is coming up because of this development, that the pace of urbanization is getting increased. Okay. Then COVID-19 revealed the dire need for planning and management of our cities. Shocks like COVID-19 often, lay bare the weaknesses in our policy and in our government structures, or just the way of our lives. So COVID-19 has laid bare the same things. For example, when we talk about capacity building planning, we need to build capacities of the urban infrastructure, not just in terms of fund function functionaries, but in terms of the overall governance and development trajectory. In the sense, that you witnessed lack of oxygen in major cities, even in the national capital, Delhi, right? So this highlights the need for ramping up public infrastructure. And for ramping up public infrastructure and for smooth delivery of public goods, you need smooth planning capacity, right? So especially with regards to health and other dimensions of public goods, whether that is education, health, sanitation, cleanliness, solid waste disposal, increasing pace of urbanization is exerting the pressure. Okay, then nature of transformation. You'll find that census towns contribute over 30% to the net increase in urban population. Census town contribute 30% to the net increase in urban population. So that is something which is very, very significant. And the last point, which I said, urban. India is transitioning from a mostly rural to a quasi-urban country. The urbanization, the aspects of urbanization is, gaining foothold in the hinterland, right? So they are no more the traditional textbookish kind of the villages or rural areas, right? Somewhere in the middle, just the way I showed you. Okay, so all of this demands, because it will not happen that these gray areas will turn urban and then we will think of them. No, we will have to plan beforehand. Okay, hence the need for urban planning capacity. Okay, now while we have understood the factors which is pushing us towards the significance and the need for urban planning capacity, let us look at the composition of urban population just in numbers, so that we can better appreciate those pulls and pressures. While the figures say that around 30% of the total population lives in urban India, census town have this much, statutory towns have this much, and outgrowths have this much. I know that some of you might not be able to understand these terms, but these terms are there. We'll come to those. Census towns, that, as per census, statutory towns, these towns are defined as per the census criteria, that this much geographical area, so on and so forth. So not going into very factual aspects here. Similar is the case for outgrowths. But this graphic, essentially, the idea is not just the hard figures. The idea is to show that there is a spatial distribution of the urban landscape and it is not homogeneous. So statutory towns will have its own share of issues which might be identical to census town in some measure, but there will be slight variations as well. Similarly, there will be regional variations. Right? So problem of Jaipur might be, there might be some issues, for example, related to roads, etc., which might be there in, let us say, Guwahati, right? But there might be certain issues which might be there in Guwahati and which are not there in Jaipur. Okay, so regional variations as well. So to appreciate that the capacity planning is needed at different levels and in different forms as per the demands of the various kinds of town, cities, or the urban area which we are taking into consideration. Now let us juxtapose the reality of India with the world. So population levels of urbanization of India and other countries. So this graphic in a way gives you an idea that while the total world population is estimated to be this, and all these figures are in millions, 7,632.81, urban population is 4,219.81, while the percentage of urban population is this much. So in United States, while the percentage of urban population is high, and in India it is low, and the report clusters it into various forms. For example, advanced economies, emerging market, and developing economies, continents and regions. This is just to show you with some hard data that how India is at a transition. So 34 is not very low, but not very high either. And as the development takes place, this figure is rapidly going to change in the near future. In the near future. Okay. So while there is a need for urban capacity planning, which in a way gets fueled by a variety of reasons which we discussed, uh, there are certain commitments which India has done to itself, to the world. As cities play a decisive role in achieving India's global agenda. Okay, for example, sustainable development goals. Sustainable development goals. In this goal 11 says making cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, while promoting urban planning as one of the recommended methods for achieving sustainable development. Okay, UN Habitat's new urban agenda 2016 basically lays down the principles of planning, construction, development, management, etc. for urban areas. Then the Paris Agreement, to which India is a signatory, United Nations Forum for Climate Change, Convention for Climate Change, I beg your pardon. Okay. Here the nationally determined pledges were made. So with regards to India, India has pledged to reduce emission density or emission intensity from 30 to 35% to 2005 levels. So where does this emissions and all these things are coming from? These are all coming from cities, industrial towns, centers, basically urban areas. And hence the need to plan and the planning capacity. Okay. Then our national growth targets, our own national growth targets, for example, employment target, infrastructure targets, our own environment protection goals, all this is needed, and all this in a way is very, very closely linked to urban planning. Okay. At the same time, there are certain interventions which the government has made. For example, National Infrastructure Pipeline, Amrut, Atal Urban Renewal Mission on the lines of JNURM. Okay. At the same time, if you look at the policy realm, you will find that 15th Finance Commission lays special emphasis on local bodies. Okay. Now let us break it down, that this planning is needed at various levels. So this planning is something which is not a top-down thing. Okay. This planning is not something which is a top down thing. It has to happen at various levels. For example, at the city level we need to find out, let us say, land use. Okay, land use. What, for what purpose a land can be used? So for example, you have industrial areas in cities. In Delhi you have so many industrial areas. Okay, then you have residential areas, mixed use areas. All this is designated because of something, right? So let us say if Delhi is expanding, or even the areas which are on the fringes of Delhi are getting urbanized, so you will have to classify the land use. Okay, then mobility planning. So you had metro coming up, now you have light rapid transit coming up. Some states have adopted BRTS. Okay, so all those things. Then environmental infrastructure planning. Okay, obviously we'll have to take care of the environment. Then implementation of various government schemes. So you have government schemes supporting the urbanization effort. So implementation of those schemes. And the last one is citizen or public outreach. See, this cannot happen without the citizen engagement. For example, there can be socio-cultural factors. So there might be a temple or a mosque or a church which is falling in an area, and you need to build a highway passing through the city, or a ring road passing through the city. So can you do that without public being supportive, that okay, it is for our God, we can worship our God, let us say 500 meters right or left, you please build the highway, it will help our children reach school faster, right? But there might be people who might try to flare up religious or social tensions. So a public outreach is an important part of urban planning capacity. Okay, then at the regional level, so just the way I gave the example of Guwahati and Jaipur, every region has its own conditions. Okay, so we need to identify and build our urban planning in harmony to that conditions or those conditions. So land use planning, for example, if I talk about let us say northeast region, which usually receives a lot of rains, the terrain is mountainous. Can my road infrastructure planning be similar there and in the Thar desert? The answer is no, right? So land use planning also should account for the regional factors, whether it is materials, design, so on and so forth. Then the next aspect of regional is regional infra. All right. Then at the national or the state level, let us say we are talking about a state and the state is planning for various parts of itself, or at the national level, we need to have a policy framework. Design. When I say design, design of programs or mission, that happens at the upper level, right? So at the state level or at the center level, and it will have accommodations for going upwards. Okay, and then there can be certain strategic aspect. For example, in border areas, for example related to ports, so on and so forth. Okay, so this happens at 3 levels. Now let us talk about the issues and challenges. issues and challenges. The first is pressure on poor population. See, while it is a reality that India has got urbanized at a very rapid pace, especially in the last 2-3 decades, but the pressure on poor population has also increased. We often talk about it in the terms of gap between India and Bharat, or between haves or have-nots. Okay, because of unplanned urbanization, uh, poor and marginalized are facing a lot of issues, whether that is poor health, poor access to sanitation, so on and so forth. At the same time, it is a burden on economy and biodiversity as well. Next, lack of adequate urban planning. Okay, you will see that a lot of areas, and it is visible in the events. For example, urban floods. Who could imagine that Patna or Chennai will flood? I mean, come on. Patna and Chennai would flood. And mind you, all those were not there, or the extent of that flooding was all not natural. It was because of the inadequate urban planning, water scarcity, droughts. Okay, all those things. So you will agree that there is a substantial lack of adequate urban planning and governance framework. Then lack of government efforts or government apathy. Government apathy. So while urban centers where VVIP lives, even within those urban centers are spick and span, you will see areas of that very city in a deliberated conditions. The biggest example is, you can take the example of New Delhi, and then you can take the example of Delhi's urban villages. There are so many areas in Delhi where you don't have, there are pipe connections, but you don't have water. Okay, so things like that. Then for long-term sustainable urban transformation, first, the systematic issues or the systemic issues need to be identified. The solution to the problem lies in the identification or acceptance of the problem. Okay. Because what happens is that often there is a lag. There is a lag in policy and implementation. So while the policy is made with all the good ideas and so on, but the implementation is shoddy. Okay, and we are looking, the policy makers usually look for quick fixes rather than long term sustainability. Okay, so then governing issues, the fault lines in the governing structures. So while there are urban local bodies, they might not be well empowered. At the same time, you will know that 30% of India's urban population lives in census towns, which are still in a way treated as rural areas. Okay, so governing issues. Okay, then vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities. When these small towns and urban areas witness a rapid growth, so the demand for urban amenities, or the demand for urban related amenities grow at a very faster pace than that can be met with supplies, and hence it leads to chaos. Hence it leads to chaos. Some other vulnerabilities: lack of proper definitions. Lack of proper definitions. Okay, so while we talk about urban, rural, semi-urban, quasi-urban, so on and so forth, but they often do not reflect the original conditions on the ground, and whether in terms of empirical ideas or whether in terms of qualitative ideas. Okay, then 74th Amendment Act, 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, was passed in conjunction with 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, in a way, giving constitutional status to local governments, in which urban local bodies were also framed. But as I identified at the introduction itself, that there are issues of functionaries, not enough power or functions have been delegated to these local bodies. So that is again a flaw. Okay, then lack of master plan. Most of the cities do not have a plan. Okay, they are simply working on patchwork approach, that okay, yahan ye ho gaya, something is wrong here, just fix it, without looking at the grand pictures. Okay, then updating without any proper evidence. Updating without any proper evidence. Often there is connivance, corruption of ground level officials, where, let us say, land use changes. Okay, suddenly which was an agricultural land or which was a recreational land gets transformed into a mixed use property, where somebody opens a small workshop. So in a way distorting the urban planning. So that is something there. Then poor land records and lack of expertise are another factors. Lack of private participation. So while it is established now that government cannot do everything, so there should be private engagement, but due to the muck that urban planning has become, there is lack of private participation. Okay, then inadequate number of urban planners in the state planning machinery. I need not explain this. Okay, so these are the issues. Then let us look at the primary factor, that is the spatial and non-spatial factors affecting the land use. So this graphic very beautifully illustrates the problem or the challenge. Policies not targeting and policies targeting spatial and land use planning. Okay, what is permitted as desired by individual businesses. So there is basically a conflict across purpose working. So a good planning would in a way harmonize and iron out these differences. Okay, so you can take the screenshot of this particular graphic and you'll be better able to appreciate the nitty-gritties or the problem with the urban planning. Okay, next, so what we need to do, we need healthy cities. When I say healthy cities, that need of multi-sectoral efforts, that the overall health of the city when it comes to the balance and the semblance in, let us say, infrastructure, land use, connectivity, mobility, everything should be sustainable. Okay, then we need land use reforms. For example, should strengthen controls and regulations and demarcate the land use. Now we have satellites, we have the mapping technologies which are available, which can be used to this end. HR reforms, needless to say that we lack expertise, and even the expertise which we have lacks training. So these human resource reform are key to capacity. So training, recruitment, equipment, all those things should be kept in mind. Okay, then re-engineering. Re-engineering. When I say re-engineering, that means that we need to flip the coin here, and instead of looking at urban planning as a top-down phenomena, we should look at bottom-up ideas, which can be far more sustainable and acceptable. Okay, then legal overall. So while we have 74th Constitutional Amendment Act and various municipalities having their own, in a way, rules and regulations wing, so all those rules and regulations need to be updated. Citizen engagement, local leadership and private participation is something as a solution which is being voiced by various committees, various experts, and I need not explain them. Okay, I think the following graphic will, guide you better. So components of cumulative capacity of urban planning in India. So while you have central, state and city level government, you need to have private sector participation with regards to, let us say, management, conducting feasibility studies, initial reports, startups to innovate in terms of city planning. Okay, and then education and research. All right. So that is something which is needed. Better academia industry interface, better policy and academia interface, so that better research, more empirical approach can be added to the urban plan. Okay, so that is something which is needed. Then interventions in urban planning, the government interventions in urban planning. So you had Amrut, okay, you have Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana urban, all right, you have Swachh Bharat, okay, Swachh Bharat, then Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Rurban Mission, okay, then you have the employment, various employment generation skilling programs running in urban areas. Okay, so all these programs are targeting different things. For example, Amrut and Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is targeting the infra or infrastructure. Swachh Bharat is more or less, linked to public goods of sanitation, cleanliness. Okay, so all those things. So government is doing its bit, but the root of the problem that we are doing, what we are doing is a patchwork. What we are doing is a patchwork should be replaced with a thoughtful, well-planned effort to meet the goals of urban development, right? And for that, urban planning becomes indispensable and urban planning capacity becomes indispensable. So this is what NITI Aayog's report is trying to cite. So you had a PIB release and NITI Aayog's report as well. You can find the summary of this particular report in the comment section and description of this particular video down there. So that's all from my side for this special report. Till I meet you next. Bye-bye.